Welcome back to the deep dive. We're going to start today by tapping into a very specific, a really profoundly isolating reality.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking directly to you, the listener, right now. You know that exact moment when you are trying to explain your current life to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is a friend you have known since college, or maybe it is a teacher at your kid's school, a neighbor,
Right.
or even a therapist.
Right. Anyone in your circle.
Exactly. You sit there and you try to explain that your ex-partner is actively manipulating your child.
Yeah.
You try to explain that your son or your daughter isn't just, choosing not to see you because they're busy or annoyed, but that they are being psychologically influenced.
And it's so hard to articulate.
It is. And as you speak, you can literally see their eyes glaze over.
That complete devastating shutdown, you see it in their posture.
Yes.
You see that pitying, almost skeptical expression just sort of settle onto their face.
Yeah.
And then come the platitudes.
Oh, the platitude.
The things well-meaning people say, because they simply do not possess the framework to understand the depth of what you are experiencing.
Right.
They will say things like, well, it takes two to tango, or divorce is just hard on everyone, give it time.
Give it time.
Or the classic, teenagers are just difficult, they will come around eventually.
In that moment, it feels like you are screaming into a void.
Absolutely.
It feels like gaslighting on a community scale, because nobody in your village, the very people who are supposed to be your support network, nobody speaks the language required to comprehend what is actually happening inside your family.
They lack the vocabulary.
They do.
Yeah.
That is the defining, just agonizing experience of the targeted or unfavored parent.
Yeah.
It isn't just the sheer trauma of losing your child.
Yeah.
It is the compounded trauma of having absolutely no way to explain that loss to the people around you without them silently concluding that you were just, a bitter ex who must have done something wrong.
Which is incredibly vital to acknowledge right at the top of our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
The isolation you feel is profound. And it is real.
It's so real.
And the reason your village reacts that way isn't necessarily because they do not care about you. It is because the human brain is wired to make assumptions based on normal, everyday relational dynamics.
Right, the normal world.
Exactly. When people see a child vehemently rejecting a parent, their normal world intuition tells them there must be a valid reason.
Yeah.
Where there is smoke, there must be fire.
Yeah.
Today, our goal is to systematically dismantle that false intuition using clinical science.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are building a translator.
A translator.
A literal toolkit for you, the targeted parent, and for any supportive family members who are listening and desperately trying to understand how to help.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to equip you with a mental presentation. This is a framework rooted entirely in Socratic questioning.
Right.
Designed so that you can explain parental alienation dynamics to a principal or a therapist or that skeptical neighbor without sounding defensive or angry or, crazy.
And to do this, we are pulling from a remarkably robust stack of sources today.
You really are.
We have clinical data from the Parental Alienation Study Group, or PASG.
Excellent data there.
Yes. We are looking closely at Dr. Craig Childress' diagnostic checklists regarding attachment-based models of alienation.
Mm-hmm.
And we are integrating Karen Woodall's profound clinical insights on transgenerational trauma and the neuroscience of coerced detachment.
So much heavy-hitting research.
It is. When you synthesize these sources, you realize very quickly that society needs to completely reframe this conversation. This is not a custody issue.
No.
This is not a high-conflict divorce. This is unequivocally a severe child protection issue.
A child protection issue. I really, really want that to sink in for everyone listening.
Yeah, it has to.
And the key to communicating this to your village isn't to lecture them.
No, definitely not.
That is the trap so many parents fall into out of pure, understandable desperation. Because if you walk into a school office and start lecturing about parental alienation and pathogenic parenting, people just tune out.
They do. They assume you are weaponizing psychological terms to win a custody fight.
Exactly. So the key is to use Socratic questioning. You want to ask the right, deep questions so that your friends and family connect the dots on their own.
Right.
You guide them to the truth rather than forcing it on them.
You lead them there methodically.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that successfully, you have to start with the foundation. You have to define the terms for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this specific arena, definitions matter profoundly. They dictate the entire lens through which the child's behavior is viewed.
When I first started reading through these sources, my initial thought was that words like estrangement and alienation were essentially just semantics.
Sure. A lot of people think that.
I mean, if your kid refuses to speak to you, the end result is the exact same empty bedroom in your house. The silence is just as loud either way.
It feels like semantics until you're standing in a courtroom.
Yeah.
Or sitting on a therapist's couch. Then, the clinical distinction between estrangement and alienation is literally the difference between losing your child forever and legally saving them.
Wow, okay.
So let's establish the clinical difference to build out the first part of your Socratic toolkit.
Let's do it.
Estrangement is a normal, healthy, biological response. It is pure cause and effect.
Okay.
Let's say a parent is genuinely abusive physically or sexually, or they are consistently dangerously neglectful, or struggling with a severe addiction that puts the child in harm's way.
Right.
The child eventually pulls away to protect themselves from an actual verifiable threat.
So estrangement is a protective response to a real-world danger.
Exactly.
But let's play devil's advocate for a second, because this is where the village gets confused. If a kid is being abused, wouldn't they naturally just arrogantly march away, slam the door, and confidently declare they hate the abuser?
That is the assumption. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of human biology, we see that the reality of childhood trauma is the exact opposite.
The opposite.
Yes. This is where the village's intuition is entirely backwards. Children are wholly dependent mammals. When they are terrified by the person who's supposed to keep them alive, they engage in something called traumatic bonding.
The sources also refer to this as anxious attachment.
They do. A genuinely abused child does not act arrogant, empowered, and haughty.
Interesting.
They are anxious, they are submissive, they are clinging, and they are hyper-compliant.
Oh, wow.
They're constantly scanning the room, walking on eggshells, trying to be perfectly behaved to avoid setting the abusive parent off.
Because they're terrified.
Exactly. Counterintuitively, they actually still want the relationship. They just desperately want the relationship to be safe. They don't want the parent to disappear. They want the terrifying behavior to stop.
That is such a clarifying distinction. It completely upends the narrative. An abused child is anxious and compliant.
Yes.
But alienation is the delusion. It is a complete rejection without any valid real-world reason. The PSG defines it as a mental condition where a child allies strongly with one parent, the favored parent, and entirely rejects the other, despite absolutely no history of abuse or neglect.
Right.
The child's reaction is entirely disproportionate to anything the targeted parent has actually done.
It is a profound psychological manipulation.
Yeah.
The child is reacting to a monster that simply does not exist in reality. They're reacting to a phantom created and sustained by the alienating parent.
Here is where the clinical reality gets really interesting and, honestly, quite sobering.
Yeah.
Because when you, the targeted parent, try to explain this to a skeptical school principal, their immediate thought is going to be, kids just don't stop loving a parent out of nowhere.
There is no smoke without fire.
Exactly. You must have done something wrong to make your child so angry. How do you handle that in the moment?
You do not get defensive. You do not list all the nice things you have done.
Which is so hard not to do.
It is incredibly hard. But instead, you deploy your first Socratic question. You look that principal or that neighbor calmly in the eye, and you ask, how do we distinguish between a child protecting themselves from an actual abuser and a child who is being manipulated to reject a loving parent?
Wow. Just boom.
Yes.
By simply asking the question, you are forcing them to acknowledge that manipulation is a real, distinct, and separate category from abuse.
You are planting the concept in their mind without arguing.
But some of these Socratic questions in the source material, they feel a little academic for a casual conversation over coffee. How do we break that down into an explain like I'm five version for a neighbor who is gossiping?
That is a great point. If a neighbor says, "What did you do?" you don't need to give them a clinical paragraph.
Right.
You can just ask them calmly, do you believe it is possible for a child to be manipulated into believing something that isn't true?
That's good.
Start small. Get them to agree to the basic concept of psychological influence first.
And once they agree to that, once they pause to consider that manipulation is possible, you follow up with the second Socratic question. You ask if a child had a warm, loving relationship with a parent for 10 years. I'm talking about reading bedtime stories, coaching the soccer team, having inside jokes, going on family vacations.
All the normal stuff.
All of it. And then suddenly, with no new evidence and no traumatic event, that child claims that parent is completely evil.
Right.
Did the parent mysteriously transform into a monster overnight, or did the child's perception of that parent artificially change?
It perfectly shifts the spotlight.
It really does.
You are moving the focus away from what did you, the parent, do wrong, and redirecting it entirely to what is currently happening inside this child's mind.
Yes.
You are inviting the skeptic to solve the mystery alongside you, rather than positioning them as an adversary.
Once you have their attention, once they're willing to look at the mystery with you, you have to present the evidence. You cannot just rely on your emotional pain. You must rely on clinical data. The PASG and Dr. Amy Baker's data provide what they call the 5-factor model.
Right.
For the listener, consider this the slide deck of your mental presentation to the village. We need to spend some real time on these factors because they are the structural pillars of your defense.
Let's walk through this 5-factor slide deck thoroughly. Factor 1 is the presence of contact refusal.
Okay.
This isn't just a teenager saying, I don't want to go to dad's house this weekend because my friends are staying here.
Right, not normal teenage stuff.
No.
Yeah.
This is an absolute rigid refusal to have any relationship. It manifests in blocked phone numbers, returning gifts unopened, or literal physical turning away when the parent enters a room. The child treats the parent like a toxic substance.
And a factor 2 is the presence of a prior positive relationship.
Yes.
The sources point out that this is crucial for establishing the baseline. As a targeted parent listening right now, you know you have gigabytes of proof on your phone.
So much proof.
You have the photo albums, you have the text messages saying, I love you, the home videos showing your child radiantly happy in your arms just a year ago.
Right.
The agonizing part isn't finding the proof, it's getting anyone to look at it.
That documented history is what shatters the smoke without fire myth. If the parent was always a monster, where did those 10 years of genuine smiles come from?
Exactly.
Factor 3, then, is the verifiable absence of abuse or severe neglect by the targeted parent.
Mm-hmm.
This clinically rules out the estrangement we discussed earlier. There are no Child Protective Services reports of actual abuse, no history of violence, no substance abuse issues that endanger the child.
Factor 4 involves the use of alienating behaviors by the favored parent.
Yes, the active campaign.
It's the bad-mouthing, the interference with visitation, the intercepting of phone calls, the subtle or overt emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
It is the favored parent constantly treating the targeted parent with contempt in front of the child.
But Factor 5.
Yeah.
Factor 5 is where we really need to focus our analytical lens today. Factors 1 through 4 set the stage. But Factor 5 is the diagnostic key. Factor 5 dictates that the child must exhibit specific, observable, behavioral manifestations of parental alienation.
Behavioral manifestations. It sounds so clinical and dry.
It does.
But when you actually read Dr. Craig Childress's work on this, these are not subtle little hints. These are neon flashing lights.
They absolutely are.
Childress calls them the big 3, and they are so deeply counterintuitive that unless your village knows exactly what to look for, they will miss them completely and misinterpret the child's behavior.
That is why building this translator is so essential. Let's break down these big 3 behavioral manifestations. Starting with the first, neon flashing light attachment system suppression.
Let's spend some time on this because it goes against everything we understand about nature.
It really does.
Biologically, we know that mammals are hardwired to love and seek proximity to their parents. It is a literal survival instinct.
Yeah.
I think of the baby duck analogy from the sources. A baby duck follows the mother duck. It doesn't matter if the mother duck is walking too fast, or if she's a bit grumpy today, or if she's a flawed duck.
Right.
The baby duck follows because its biological survival depends entirely on staying close to the parent. Kids are incredibly forgiving because they inherently need us.
They do.
So for a child to completely suppress that instinct, to treat a parent not just with teenage indifference, but with absolute revulsion, requires a massive psychological override.
It is entirely unnatural. Dr. Childress argues emphatically that you cannot just turn off the attachment system with a switch.
Right.
The only way a child's brain overrides that deeply ingrained biological drive is if they are being actively influenced to view that targeted parent as a severe, literal threat to their survival.
A literal threat?
Yes, to rationalize this sudden detachment, the child has to completely rewrite their own history.
What does that rewriting actually look like in practice?
It is devastating to witness. If you show an alienated child a photo of them laughing and hugging the targeted parent from 2 years ago, they will not smile nostalgically.
Mm-hmm.
They will look at the photo and retroactively alter the narrative. They will say, I was faking those smiles. Or you forced me to look happy for the camera.
Oh, wow.
Or I only hugged you because I was afraid of what you would do if I didn't.
Yeah.
They erased the gigabytes of love to make their current hatred internally consistent.
They just rewrite their own foundational memories.
They do.
It's heartbreaking. And that leads to the second neon flashing light, which I found to be the most disturbing part of the source material: personality disorder traits.
Yes.
We are talking about the chameleon effect, where a child begins displaying the narcissistic or borderline traits of the alienator.
It is deeply unsettling. What you see is a child, maybe 10, 12, or 14 years old, suddenly adopting this severe pathology of the alienating parent. There are three distinct parts to this display. First is intense grandiosity and entitlement.
I want to pause here and ask you to clarify this for the listeners, because anyone with a teenager knows they can act incredibly entitled and grandiose.
Oh, absolutely.
Is normal teenage rebellion the same thing we are talking about here? How does a teacher tell the difference?
It is a critical distinction. Normal teenage rebellion sounds like, "Dad, you're so annoying, you just don't understand my life, leave me alone."
Right.
They might slam a door or roll their eyes. That is a normal, albeit frustrating, developmental stage of separating from the parent.
Okay.
Grandiosity in an alienated child is entirely different. It sounds like haughty, cold arrogance. A 12-year-old will sit across from their 40-year-old parent, completely devoid of emotion, and say, "Your moral character is insufficient for me to associate with you.
Wow.
I do not approve of your parenting style,
Wow.
and I have officially decided to terminate our relationship."
It sounds like an HR executive firing someone, or a lawyer issuing a cease and desist letter.
Exactly.
It does not sound like a child talking. It is an unnatural inversion of the child-adult hierarchy.
The child sits in supreme judgment of the adult. They feel the parent owes them everything: money, cars, specific privileges. But if the parent asks for basic respect or adherence to house rules, the child explodes in rage, viewing it as an infringement on their fundamental rights.
That is so intense.
But the most chilling part of these personality disorder traits is the complete absence of empathy.
Let's talk about that absence of empathy. And because a normal kid, even if they are furious at you, usually feels some distress if they push you too far.
Right.
If I yelled at my mom when I was a teenager and she started crying, I felt terrible guilt. The anger would melt into regret.
Because your empathy was intact. In an alienated child, that empathy switch is completely disabled, but only toward the targeted parent.
Only toward them.
Yes,
Yeah.
An alienated child can watch the targeted parent weep openly, pleading just to have a normal conversation, and the child will not show a flicker of distress.
That's terrifying.
They might sneer, they might smirk. They often feel a sense of cold, victorious triumph watching that parent suffer. Yes. They view the parent's pain with absolute indifference, or even view it as proof that the parent is weak and pathetic.
It is literally like watching someone who has been robotized.
It really is.
Which brings us to the third of Dr. Childress's big three: delusional beliefs, the absurd justifications for the rejection.
This is where the lack of reality testing becomes glaringly obvious. The child will vehemently claim that the targeted parent is abusive, dangerous, or toxic.
Right.
But when you ask them for examples, when you apply Socratic questioning and say, "What did they do that was so dangerous?" the reasons they give are bizarrely trivial and completely disproportionate to the level of rejection.
The sources gave some wild examples of this.
They did.
The kid says he taps his pen on the table when he reads, and it is absolute torture.
Right.
Or she makes me eat vegetables, she's trying to poison me. Or he asked me to do my homework, he's a tyrant.
What is fascinating here, clinically speaking, is that the child has adopted the heavy, severe label dangerous, abusive, toxic, implanted by the alienating parent. But because the targeted parent is actually a normal, loving person, the child has no real-world memories of actual trauma to back up the label.
Because it never happened.
Exactly.
Right.
Their brain knows they are supposed to hate this person, but they don't have the data. So they have to grasp at straws.
Wow.
They take normal parental behaviors, minor annoyances, or standard discipline and blow them up into capital crimes to justify their total rejection.
So, to summarize this slide deck for the village, if you see a child suppressing their natural love, acting with haughty, arrogant entitlement without a shred of empathy, and citing pen tapping as a reason to permanently divorce their parent,
Yes.
you are not looking at a messy custody battle, you are looking at a clinical pathology.
Correct. And to translate these behaviors even further for the listener support network, we have to introduce the psychological concept of splitting.
Okay.
because this is the cognitive framework the child is operating within.
Splitting the black and white world. In our everyday lives, relationships exist in the gray. You love your spouse, but you get incredibly annoyed when they leave their socks on the floor.
Yes.
You adore your mom, but she drives you crazy when she asks too many invasive questions. Normal human emotion is full of ambivalence.
Cognitive ambivalence is the hallmark of a healthy, mature mind. You can hold two conflicting thoughts at once. I love this person, and I am currently very angry at this person.
Right.
In alienation, the child entirely loses the capacity for ambivalence. The world is split completely into black and white.
Black and white.
The favored, alienating parent is elevated to the status of a flawless saint, the perpetual, perfect victim who can do no wrong and must be protected at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
The targeted parent is degraded to a worthless demon, entirely evil, dangerous, and stupid, with no redeeming qualities whatsoever.
There is zero gray area. And the data backs this up beautifully. The sources mention the PRQ test, the parental acceptance rejection questionnaire.
Yes.
Tell us how this test proves the delusion.
The PRQ data is incredibly revealing. When you give this standardized clinical test to kids in normal families, or even families going through a genuinely tough, high-conflict divorce, the scores are mixed.
Right, as you'd expect.
Kids see good and bad traits in both parents.
Mm-hmm.
They might score dad a little lower on patience and mom a little higher on warmth, but it's a spectrum.
Exactly.
But when you give the PRQ test to an alienated child, they give statistically impossible scores.
Impossible.
Yes. They will give the favored parent a perfect 100% positive score and the targeted parent a pure 0.
Wow.
Human beings are not 100% perfect or 100% evil. That data point alone proves we are dealing with an implanted delusion, not a reality-based assessment.
Which perfectly sets up the Socratic trap you can use for the independent thinker phenomenon.
Right.
This is a script that trips up so many well-meaning teachers, judges, and therapists. The child insists it is their own choice.
The independent thinker script is perhaps the most common defense mechanism you will encounter. You ask an alienated child, "Why are you saying these awful things about your dad?" And before you even finish the sentence, the child preemptively recites, "Nobody told me to say this. This is my own decision. I am an independent thinker. Mom didn't make me do this."
But let's play devil's advocate for a second here, because this is exactly what the village will say.
Sure.
If a 16-year-old looks me dead in the eye and says, "This is my choice," isn't it incredibly arrogant of us to say we know their mind better than they do? Shouldn't we respect their autonomy?
It feels like we should,
Yeah.
until you analyze the phrasing.
Okay.
Normal kids don't actively assert their autonomy using adult, legalistic phrasing.
Right.
They don't announce they're independent thinkers. They just think.
That's true.
When a child preemptively defends the other parent before an accusation is even made, they're reciting a script.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the family dynamic, you realize why the child does this.
Yeah.
The child is jumping on a grenade to protect the alienating parent from accusations of brainwashing.
Because they know the stakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They know that if they say, "Mom told me to say this," Mom will get in trouble with the court. And more importantly, Mom will be furious with them.
Yeah.
So they take full, absolute ownership of the hatred to shield their abuser.
So when that skeptical grandparent says to you, "But the kid looked me right in the eye and said it was his own choice," you use your Socratic toolkit.
Yes.
You ask the grandparent, have you ever met a human being who is 100% flawless or 100% evil?
Beautifully framed.
If a child is describing their parents in these cartoonish, statistically impossible extremes, while preemptively using adult legal phrases to defend their own autonomy, are we hearing a child's complex reality, or were we hearing a rehearsed script?
It forces the village to analyze the behavior objectively, rather than just taking the child's words at face value.
Exactly.
And this is especially crucial for the teachers, coaches, and school staff who are witnessing these dynamics play out in the school environment.
Let's talk about what the teachers see. Because teachers are stuck in the middle, and they generally want to make the compassionate choice for the student.
Of course.
The sources highlight something called the exclusion demand. This is when a child approaches a teacher and demands that the targeted parent, let's say dad, not attend the school play or the baseball game because his presence stresses them out or gives them anxiety.
Now, a well-meaning teacher or coach hears that and thinks, well, we want the child to feel calm. We want them to play a good game or perform well in the play.
Right.
We shouldn't stress the child out. Maybe dad should just stay home this time. It feels like the right protective thing to do.
But the clinical insight from the source material flips this completely upside down. It fundamentally changes whose stress we are actually dealing with.
It does. The teacher needs to understand that the stress they are witnessing does not actually belong to the child.
Wow.
The child is acting as what psychologists call a regulatory object for the fragile, alienating parent.
A regulatory object?
Yes. The alienating parent is the one who cannot emotionally handle the ex-spouse's presence at the baseball game.
Ah, I see.
They have consciously or unconsciously signaled to the child that if the other parent is there, they will fall apart, or they will cause a scene, or they will be angry and withdraw their love from the child later that night.
So the child preemptively empties their own bleachers to keep the peace at home. They sacrifice their own moment to manage the adult's emotions.
The child banishes the targeted parent to protect the fragile, alienating parent.
It is so sad.
The child sacrifices their own fundamental psychological need to have both parents cheer them on just to manage the adult's anxiety.
Right.
So the Socratic question for the teacher or the coach is, does a normal child scan the bleachers, hoping to see fewer people loving them? Since when does a child get to dictate which parents attend a public school-sanctioned event?
And along with the exclusion demand, teachers and therapists also constantly hear the weaponization of the word forced.
Yes, forced.
This is another massive linguistic red flag. The child will say, I don't want to be forced to go to mom's house this weekend.
It is a very specific linguistic marker. Think about everyday family life. In normal, healthy families, we do not use the word forced for routine family activities.
Right. I don't tell my kids they are forced to go to grandma's house for Thanksgiving. We don't say we are forced to go to math class or forced to empty the dishwasher. It's just life. It's an expectation.
But in the world of alienation, normal parenting time is framed to the child as a gross violation of their civil rights.
A civil rights violation.
Yes. The alienating parent empowers the child to believe they are an equal peer who should get to dictate the legal custody schedule.
Unbelievable.
So when a court order says the child must go to mom's house, the narrative at home is, look at them forcing you against your will. They don't respect your boundaries. You are a victim of this oppressive system.
It creates this massive, highly activated victim mentality. The kid truly believes they are fighting a righteous war for their freedom, not just complaining about having 2 bedrooms. Okay, so we have covered the definitions, the 5-factor model, the scripts, and what the school sees.
Right.
But to really understand the gravity of this, we have to look at the mechanism. Why do children reject a parent they love just to survive? What is actually happening in their brain?
This brings us to the core psychological trap, the double bind, and the concept of coerced detachment.
Let's use the tightrope walker analogy for this because it paints such a vivid, terrifying picture of the child's reality.
It really does.
Imagine this child is trapped on a high wire, balancing dangerously between 2 platforms, mom's house and dad's house. In the primary home, the alienator's home, there is an unspoken, terrifying loyalty test happening every single minute of every single day.
The unspoken, pervasive message is, if you love your other parent, you are actively betraying me. And if you betray me, I will withdraw my love, my affection, and your safety.
That is so heavy.
For a dependent child, the threat of losing their primary caregiver's love is tantamount to a threat against their actual physical survival. They cannot afford to lose the person who puts food on the table.
So they are trapped on the tightrope. If they love the targeted parent, they lose the alienator's love and safety.
Right.
If they want to keep the alienator happy and safe, they have to learn to hate the targeted parent. It is a tragic, impossible choice. The child essentially amputates the targeted parent to buy their own safety.
Amputates is the exact clinical reality. It is a psychological amputation.
Wow.
It is not a free choice. It is a profound survival strategy designed to stabilize a highly unstable adult.
Right.
And if we look at the neuroscience of this, what Karen Woodall eloquently calls fright, without solution, it becomes even clearer.
Let's spend some time on fright without solution. What is happening neurologically during this?
Normally, when a child is frightened by something in the world, a loud noise, a scary dog, they run to their parent for comfort and regulation.
Yes, of course.
But what happens when the parent who is supposed to comfort you is the actual source of your fear and instability? What happens when the parent is emotionally dysregulated, fragile, or covertly threatening? The child cannot run away because they are biologically dependent, but they cannot seek comfort from the threat.
So their nervous system has nowhere to go.
Their brain floods with cortisol. They enter a state of frozen watchfulness.
Watchfulness.
Yes, they become hypervigilant to the alienating parent's moods. Is mom happy today? Is dad going to explode if I mention what I did this weekend?
Mm-hmm.
And to survive this terrifying high-stress environment, they engage in a severe defense mechanism known as identification with the aggressor.
I really want to dig into identification with the aggressor because it sounds like a hostage situation.
It is deeply related to the dynamics we see in hostage situations, often colloquially referred to as Stockholm Syndrome.
Stockholm Syndrome. Okay.
When a person is trapped in a situation where someone else holds total power over their well-being, the ego defense mechanism kicks in. The child thinks, unconsciously, if I can't beat them and I can't escape them, I must become them. They align with the bully to avoid being targeted by the bully.
Pure fear masquerading as aggressive loyalty.
Exactly.
The child joins forces with the alienating parent against the targeted parent because it is the only way to feel safe in the primary home.
Yes.
They adopt the abuser's worldview. The child essentially becomes the emotional caretaker for the adult, which is a complete abusive inversion of the natural parenting dynamic.
And this brings up a crucial analytical point. When we observe this dynamic, it tells us a tremendous amount about the pathology of the alienator.
Listening to all of this, it is so easy for the listener to just label their ex, the alienating parent, as pure, calculated evil. You just want to say, they are a monster who is destroying my child for fun.
It is entirely understandable to feel that rage.
Yes.
But clinically, simply labeling them as evil stops us from understanding the pathology, and therefore stops us from predicting their next move. We have to look at transgenerational trauma. Karen Woodall uses a hauntingly beautiful and tragic phrase, ghosts in the nursery.
Ghosts in the nursery. Let's unpack that.
The alienating parent is very often reenacting their own deeply unresolved childhood trauma.
Okay.
Imagine a parent who suffered a profound abandonment, abuse, or neglect when they were 6 years old. They survived it, but they never healed from it. They carry that psychic wound into adulthood. Decades later, they go through a divorce. The immense psychological stress of the divorce, the perceived abandonment by the spouse, causes them to regress.
Yeah.
Psychologically, they revert to being that terrified, helpless 6-year-old child.
So when they look at the custody schedule, they aren't seeing a normal parenting arrangement. They are seeing their own original trauma happening all over again.
Exactly.
They grip onto their own child, not out of healthy parental love, but out of this primal, unhealed terror of being abandoned again.
Precisely. They view the other parent's relationship with the child not as normal co-parenting, but as an existential threat to their very survival. Wow. They create what the sources call a world without windows. The family becomes a closed cult system built entirely around an encrypted delusion.
A closed cult system.
Narcissistic fragility and a borderline fear of abandonment drive the entire campaign. No outside light, no objective truth is allowed in. The child is drafted to serve as the emotional life raft for the drowning parent.
When you describe it like that, it makes me think about the long-term toll this takes. If a child is trapped in that environment, what is the actual psychological cost?
That is profound.
Which brings us to the true damage, the therapy trap, and what we actually do about all of this. Because the sources explicitly classify this not as a custody dispute, but as mental kidnapping.
And this isn't just an opinion or a dramatic metaphor. If you open the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, this exact dynamic is classified under V995.51, child psychological abuse or pathogenic parenting.
Child psychological abuse. Because since a child is quite literally 50% of their mother and 50% of their father, when you systematically teach them to hate one of those parents, you are inducing profound self-hatred.
Yes, you are.
You are teaching them that half of their own DNA, half of their own soul is garbage. You teach them that love is highly conditional and based entirely on manipulation and passing loyalty tests.
The long-term damage to the child's ability to form healthy adult relationships, to trust, to engage in conflict resolution, is catastrophic. They are robbed of their childhood.
Absolutely robbed.
And for the targeted parent, the listener, the cost is what psychologists term ambiguous loss.
Ambiguous loss. That term hits so hard.
It does.
If mourning a child who is still physically alive, you walk past their empty bedroom every day, you see their graduation photos pop up on a mutual friend's Facebook page, but you yourself are blocked. You might see them at the grocery store, but their mind is completely gone. They look at you with cold, dead eyes. It is a grief without a funeral. It's an agonizing purgatory because society doesn't know how to grieve with you.
It is a unique and agonizing trauma. And the most dangerous trap in trying to navigate this purgatory and trying to get help is traditional talk therapy.
I really want to focus on this because the trap of traditional talk therapy blew my mind when I read the sources.
It surprises a lot of people.
Alienators love to stand in front of a judge or a school counselor and say, just listen to the child, we should get them a therapist and let the child speak their truth. I have nothing to hide.
It sounds incredibly reasonable. It sounds like the responsible, modern thing to do.
It does.
But traditional therapists are trained in a specific model, rooted in Carl Rogers' concepts of unconditional positive regard.
Unconditional positive regard.
Right. They are trained to validate their client's lived experience. The therapist assumes the client, the child, is telling the authentic truth.
Which makes sense normally.
Normally, yes. So when the child sits on the couch and recites the implanted script, my dad is scary, my dad is dangerous, he taps his pen. The therapist says, I hear you. That sounds so difficult. Your feelings are valid.
But in the context of a closed cult system, what does that validation actually do?
It inadvertently validates the delusion. This is known clinically as third-party alienation.
Third-party alienation.
The therapist unwittingly cements the false belief in the child's mind. The child walks out thinking, see, even the doctor agrees with mom that dad is a monster. I must be right.
Wow.
Furthermore, a child simply cannot speak freely in therapy while they're still living in the fire of the alienator's coercive control.
Right.
If they say something nice about the targeted parent in therapy, they know the therapist might take notes. It might get back to the alienator in court, and the child will be punished at home. So they just perform the script for the therapist.
You cannot treat a burn victim while they are still standing inside the burning building. True therapy cannot even begin until the child is physically protected or removed from the coercive control of the alienating environment.
That is the tragic reality that the family court system often fails to understand.
So, given all of this weight, what do we do? Let's move to the action plan.
Yes.
We have built the translation, we understand psychology, we know the traps. What is the toolkit for the village? If I am the aunt, the soccer coach, the teacher, the neighbor, what do I actually do when I interact with this child?
The primary paramount rule for the village is this. Do not validate the split.
Okay.
When the child comes to you and says, my dad is evil, I hate him, he's the worst person alive, your natural human instinct is to agree and comfort them. To say, oh, I'm so sorry he's like that.
Right.
Do not do that. You must be a healthy mirror.
Give us the script for that. What does a healthy mirror actually sound like in normal conversation?
You remain calm, neutral, and steadfastly pro-relationship. You say, I can see you are really upset right now, and I'm sorry you are hurting. But I have to tell you, I have always known your dad to be a deeply kind person who loves you very much. That has been my experience of him.
You just plant that tiny seed of doubt. You don't scream at them that they are brainwashed.
Yeah.
You don't argue with them.
Yeah.
You just hold up a mirror of objective reality that contradicts the cult programming.
Exactly. And the second tool for the village is beware of flying monkeys.
I love the Wizard of Oz analogy here. The Wicked Witch doesn't always do her own dirty work. She sends the flying monkeys out to tear the scarecrow apart.
Alienating parents utilize the exact same tactic.
They do.
They recruit neighbors, school parents, and extended family members to harass the targeted parent, spread rumors, or file false reports.
Mm-hmm.
So the message to the village is do not be a pawn in someone else's psychological warfare. If you hear a horrible rumor about me, have the courage to come to me directly and check the source.
Okay, and now the most important part of the toolkit. The toolkit for the targeted parent, our listener.
Yes.
The sources have a very clear directive,
Yeah.
and it is probably the hardest thing you will ever have to do. Do not counter-alienate.
It is overwhelmingly tempting to fight fire with fire.
It is.
When your child is screaming at you that you're a monster because mom said so, your desperate instinct is to scream back, Mom is lying. Mom is the crazy one. Look at these court documents.
But if you do that, if you lose your cool and start yelling about the ex, what happens?
You prove the child's narrative correct. The child has been programmed to believe you are unstable, dangerous, and angry.
Right.
If you start screaming defensively, you look unstable, dangerous, and angry. You must be the boring, completely sane, emotionally regulated anchor. You cannot engage in the mudslinging.
Which brings us to a very practical tool, the BIF method for dealing with the alienating ex. BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Let's role play this for a second. Imagine you get an email at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's 5 paragraphs long, all caps, accusing you of feeding the kids junk food, claiming you don't love them, stating you are emotionally abusive, and threatening to take you back to court.
Classic.
Your heart rate spikes. The old, you would write a 10-page essay refuting every point. What does the BIFF response look like?
You treat the ex's manic, abusive emails like a bland, bureaucratic business transaction. Do not defend yourself against their wild accusations.
Just ignore the accusation.
Yes, just drop the mic on the drama. The BIFF response to that 5-paragraph rant is simply, "Thank you for the update on your thoughts.
Yeah.
I will pick Tommy up at 4 p.m. on Friday for soccer as scheduled. Have a good week."
You just starve the fire of oxygen. You give them absolutely nothing to use against you. And finally, for the listener, the overarching philosophy you have to adopt is to hold the space. Be the lighthouse.
This is where the long-term hope lies.
Hmm.
The fog of parental alienation very often lifts when the child grows older and leaves the cult environment of the primary home.
Yeah.
They go away to college, or they get a job, or they form a serious romantic relationship. They start interacting with the real world, and the cognitive dissonance begins to crack.
They start seeing that other families don't operate like a high-security prison. They realize their roommates' parents don't act like this.
Yes. But when that fog lifts and they realize what has happened, they are often overcome with immense, crushing guilt for how they treated you.
Of course.
They need to know that you are still there, waiting. You don't chase their boat out into the violent storm. You keep your lighthouse on, shining steadily, so that when the storm finally breaks, they know exactly how to navigate back to your shores.
Keep your lighthouse on. So, as we conclude our toolkit for today, we hope we have achieved a major shift in perspective.
We really do.
We are moving the village from being confused spectators of a messy divorce to being highly educated allies who recognize a severe loyalty conflict and a literal psychological kidnapping.
And we deeply acknowledge the exhausting, truly heroic nature of the targeted parent's battle. You are not just fighting for custody time. You are fighting to protect your child's fundamental human right to give and receive love from both of their parents freely.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. The source material asks what we teach children about conflict resolution if we allow them to simply divorce a parent for no valid reason.
Right.
But let's push this further. Let's look at the generational future.
This raises a profound question about the legacy of this specific trauma.
Think about this. If mental kidnapping successfully rewrites a child's foundational history and teaches them that they must amputate love simply to survive their own childhood, what happens when that child eventually becomes a parent themselves?
Yeah.
How does an adult who is actively taught to fear unconditional love navigate the profound, terrifying vulnerability of holding their own newborn baby?
It's a huge question.
If their only blueprint for safety in a family was conditional loyalty, psychological splitting, and walking on eggshells, how do they break that cycle? By standing your ground today, by using your BIF communication, by educating your village with Socratic questions, and by keeping your lighthouse on no matter how dark it gets. You aren't just fighting for your child right now. You might be breaking a transgenerational curse for a grandchild you haven't even met yet.
A powerful, sobering, and profoundly necessary perspective.
Keep your lighthouse on. Use your Socratic toolkit. We'll see you in the next deep dive.